Water expands when it freezes. This simple fact, taught in every schoolroom where science is part of the curriculum, becomes deadly when the water is contained in a pipe that cannot expand with it. The ice forms slowly at first, crystals growing along the inner walls, narrowing the passage that water flows through. Then the full freeze comes, the water converting entirely to ice, and the ice demanding more space than the water occupied. The pipe resists because the pipe was built to contain liquid, not solid. The ice pushes harder because ice does not care about the intentions of the builder. And eventually, inevitably, something gives. The pipe cracks. The pipe splits. The pipe bursts open and releases whatever pressure had built up inside. And the water system that worked perfectly in autumn becomes a network of frozen failures when winter proves what summer never tested. The solution has been understood for as long as people have built water systems in cold climates. Below a certain depth, the ground maintains a temperature that does not freeze, regardless of what the air above is doing. This depth, called the frost line, varies by location and by the severity of winter, but it exists everywhere that winter reaches below freezing. In Montana, in the 1880s, the frost line in a typical winter reached perhaps 3 feet. In a severe winter, it might reach 4 or 5. In the worst winters, the ones that came once a generation, it could reach 6 feet or deeper, freezing everything that had been buried with normal winters in mind. The engineers who designed water systems for Montana towns in the 1880s knew about the frost line. They included it in their calculations, buried their pipes below the depth that normal winters would freeze to, and congratulated themselves on their foresight. They did not design for the worst winters. They did not bury pipes to the depth that severe winters would reach. They calculated for normal because normal was cheaper, because normal seemed reasonable, because the worst winters were rare enough that designing for them seemed excessive. Margaret Vogel's husband, Heinrich, had been one of those engineers. He had designed water systems in 3 Montana towns before typhoid took him in the summer of 1884, leaving Margaret with a homestead, a 19-year-old daughter, and all the engineering knowledge that Heinrich had shared with her over 23 years of marriage. He had taught her mathematics and physics and the principles of hydraulics, not because he thought she would ever need to use them, but because he loved explaining how things worked, and she loved understanding. When he died, that knowledge remained, waiting for the day when she would need to apply it. That day came in the autumn of 1885, when Margaret decided to build a water system for her homestead. The spring was 300 feet uphill from the house, emerging from a rocky outcrop that had provided water to the property since before the Vogels bought it. In summer, Margaret and Anna carried buckets up and down that hill several times a day, a labor that consumed hours and produced aching backs and chapped hands. In winter, the trips became treacherous, the path icy and dangerous, the cold making every journey a misery. Other homesteads had water systems, wooden pipes that carried water from springs to houses through gravity alone. Margaret decided she would build one too, but she would build it properly. She began by calculating the frost line. Not the normal frost line that Heinrich's engineering manuals suggested, but the worst case, the depth that frost might reach in a winter, worse than any the territory had recorded. She researched the coldest winters in Montana's brief written history. She talked to old-timers who remembered winters before there were towns. She calculated and recalculated until she was certain of her number, 7 feet. The frost line in the worst possible winter might reach 6 feet, so she would bury her pipes at 7. 2 feet deeper than the town's water system. 3 feet deeper than any other homestead in the territory. Deep enough that no winter, no matter how severe, could freeze what she buried. The digging began in late summer of 1885. Margaret and Anna worked alone, unable to afford hired help, unwilling to ask neighbors who would only try to talk them out of what they were doing. They dug a trench 300 feet long and 7 feet deep, removing tons of earth with nothing but shovels and picks and the determination that had kept them alive since Heinrich's death. They worked from dawn to dusk when the weather permitted, racing against the autumn that would freeze the ground and make further digging impossible. The neighbors noticed. A trench 7 feet deep, stretching across a widow's property, was the kind of thing that attracted attention, especially when the widow was known to have strange ideas about engineering and mathematics and other subjects that respectable women did not concern themselves with. Mayor Cornelius Thatcher rode out to investigate in early September, his horse picking carefully along the edge of the trench that had reached the halfway point. He found Margaret at the bottom, 7 feet down, prying loose a boulder that blocked her progress. Her face was dirty, her clothes were men's work clothes, and her expression when she looked up at the mayor suggested that she knew exactly what he was going to say and did not care to hear it. "Mrs. Vogel," Thatcher called down, his voice carrying the particular condescension of a man explaining reality to someone he considered incapable of understanding it. "I have received inquiries about your excavation. People are concerned. This trench is far deeper than necessary for any water system. The town's pipes are buried at 2 feet, and they function perfectly well. What exactly do you think you are accomplishing with this excessive digging?" Margaret set down her pry bar and looked up at the mayor, her blue eyes sharp behind her wire-rimmed spectacles. "I am accomplishing a water system that will not freeze when winter proves your 2 feet inadequate," she said. "The frost line in a severe winter can reach 6 feet. My husband calculated this before he died. Your town's pipes are buried 4 feet above where they should be. When the cold winter comes, and it will come, your pipes will burst while mine continue to flow." Thatcher laughed, the comfortable laugh of a man who had never been wrong about anything involving money. "Your husband was an engineer who worried too much. 2 feet has been sufficient for every winter since the town was founded. 6 feet is the fantasy of someone who calculates for disasters that never occur. You are wasting your labor, Mrs. Vogel. You are making yourself a spectacle. And you are teaching your daughter that a woman's opinion about engineering matters, which it does not." Margaret resumed prying at the boulder. When the pipes burst, she said, without looking up, "You may come to my homestead for water. I will not charge you for it. I will simply remind you that my husband's calculations were correct and your cost-cutting was foolish." Thatcher rode away with his certainty intact, and Margaret continued digging, because arguing with confident men accomplished nothing. The frozen pipes would argue for her. The flowing water would make her case in ways that no words could match. What she built provided water when every other system failed. Subscribe to Wild West Retribution and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because the winter that proved her right proved everyone else catastrophically wrong. The water system was complete by late October. 300 feet of wooden pipe, bored from straight pine logs, laid in a trench 7 feet deep, packed with straw for additional insulation, connected to a spring house that maintained the water's temperature above freezing, even in the coldest weather. The system worked by gravity alone, the spring higher than the house, the water flowing downhill through pipes that would never feel the frost, because the frost could never reach them. Margaret ran the first water into her house on October 28, 1885. She turned a wooden tap, and water flowed into her kitchen basin, clean and cold, and delivered without a single trip up the hill. Anna cried when she saw it, not because she was weak, but because she understood what they had accomplished, what months of labor had produced, what her father's teaching had made possible. They had running water in their home, a luxury that most frontier families would never know, built by their own hands from their own knowledge. The winter of 1885 to 86 was mild. The town's pipes did not freeze. Thatcher told everyone who would listen that the Vogel widow had wasted her summer digging a trench 4 times deeper than necessary, that her excessive caution was proof of a mind that did not understand practical economics. The 2 feet of coverage had been sufficient, just as he had said it would be. The deeper pipes were a monument to foolishness, an example of what happened when women tried to do engineering. The winter of 1886 to 87 was not mild. The cold arrived in November and settled over Montana like a killing weight. The temperature dropped below 0 and stayed there. It dropped to 20 below, to 30 below, to 40 below on the coldest nights. The snow piled deep and then froze solid, insulating the ground in some ways, but doing nothing to stop the cold that had already penetrated. The frost line, that boundary between frozen and unfrozen earth, began sinking deeper with each passing week of relentless cold. The first pipes burst on Christmas Day. The town's main water line, buried at the regulation 2 feet, froze solid and cracked open somewhere beneath Main Street. The pressure that had pushed water through the system now pushed water up through the frozen ground, flooding the street with water that immediately turned to ice. Families who had drawn water from taps for 3 years suddenly had no water at all, their homes disconnected from a system that had failed catastrophically. Thatcher organized repair crews, but repair was impossible. The ground was frozen solid to a depth of 3 feet and growing. Digging down to the broken pipes would require dynamite or spring thaw, neither of which was immediately available. The only option was to work around the breaks, to isolate sections of the system that still functioned, to ration what water remained in the pipes that had not yet frozen. By New Year's Day, more pipes had burst. By mid-January, the entire town water system was offline, a network of frozen channels and cracked wood that would not function again until spring thaw allowed repairs. Families melted snow for drinking water, a process that consumed firewood and produced never enough liquid for the needs of people and livestock. The town that had congratulated itself on its modern water system was suddenly living like pioneers, hauling buckets and melting ice, and learning what it meant to be without running water in the depths of winter. The frost line reached 4 feet by the end of January. It reached 5 feet by mid-February. It touched 6 feet in the last week of February, exactly the depth that Margaret had calculated, exactly the depth that Thatcher had called fantasy, exactly the depth that had frozen every water system in the territory except one. Margaret's pipes continued to flow, 7 feet below the surface, in the stable warmth of earth that the frost could not reach. Water moved from spring to house without interruption. She turned her tap and water came out. She drew baths and washed clothes and watered her livestock and lived with a comfort that the rest of the territory had forgotten was possible. The first families came on February 10th. The Hendersons with their 5 children, their faces chapped from cold and their buckets empty. They had heard that the Vogel widow still had water, that her pipes had not burst, that her excessive trench had proven to be exactly what was needed when excessive cold proved that normal preparations were inadequate. Margaret gave them water. She let them fill their buckets from the tap that flowed freely while the town system lay frozen and shattered. She did not lecture them about frost lines or engineering calculations. She simply provided what they needed and watched them carry it away, knowing that more would come as word spread. More came. The Millers came on February 11th, then the Carlsons, then family after family as the town's situation grew more desperate. They came with buckets and barrels and sleds to haul water back to homes where the taps had been dry for weeks. They came with the humility of people who had dismissed a widow's engineering and now depended on it to survive. Mayor Thatcher came on February 22nd. He came alone, driving a wagon through snow that reached his horse's belly, his fine clothes hidden under practical winter gear that announced his desperation more clearly than any words could. He found Margaret at her kitchen basin, filling jars with water that would be delivered to families who could not make the journey themselves. Her daughter Anna was loading filled containers onto a sled, preparing for a delivery run that had become a daily routine. "Mrs. Vogel," Thatcher said. His voice had lost the condescension that had characterized it during their last conversation. "The town council has authorized me to negotiate for water. We are prepared to pay whatever price you consider fair. The situation has become critical." Margaret looked at the mayor, who had called her husband's calculations fantasy. The mayor who had said that a woman's opinion about engineering did not matter. The mayor whose cost-cutting had frozen the pipes of every family who trusted his judgment. "There is no price," she said. "Water is survival, not commerce. Bring your wagons and your barrels, fill them and distribute them to whoever needs water. Do this as long as the freeze lasts." Thatcher nodded, too relieved to feel the shame that he probably should have felt. He began organizing water distribution from the Vogel homestead, his wagons making daily trips to fill barrels that would be rationed among the town's families. The water system that one widow had built was now supplying an entire town, not because she charged for it, but because she had built what everyone needed and no one else had bothered to construct. The freeze lasted until late March. By the time temperatures finally rose above zero consistently, the town's water system had been offline for nearly 3 months. The damage was extensive, over 200 feet of burst pipe, countless connections cracked by ice expansion, a network that would require the entire summer to repair and rebuild. The cost of repairs exceeded the savings that shallow burial had produced. The economics of cost-cutting revealed as false economy when the bill finally came due. The reckoning came in April, when the town council met to discuss repairs and the future of the water system. Thatcher had invited Margaret to attend, not as a curiosity, but as a consultant, a recognition that her engineering knowledge had proven itself when his own judgment had failed. "We will be rebuilding the water system," Thatcher announced to the assembled council. "The question before us is the depth at which we bury the new pipes." He looked at Margaret. "Mrs. Vogel, you calculated a frost line of 6 feet when everyone else calculated 3. You buried your pipes at 7 feet when everyone else buried at 2. Your system survived. Every other system failed. I am asking you to share the calculations that you used so that we can build our new system to the same standard." Margaret stood, her wire-rimmed spectacles glinting in the lamplight, her posture carrying the quiet authority of someone who had been right when it mattered. "My husband taught me that you do not build for the winter you expect," she said. "You build for the worst winter you can imagine, and then you add margin. The calculations are simple. The will to do the work is what most people lack. You wanted to save money by digging shallow. The frost charged you for that savings with interest. Build to 7 feet, and the frost will never charge you again. The town rebuilt to 7 feet. The work took most of the summer, the deeper trenches requiring far more labor than the shallow trenches had required. But no one complained about the extra digging. They had learned what shallow burial cost when the bill came due in frozen pipes and waterless homes. Margaret Vogel lived on her Montana homestead for another 31 years, passing in the spring of 1918 at the age of 77. She saw the town's water system tested by severe winters in 1893, 1899, and 1907, and she watched with quiet satisfaction as the 7-foot depth held each time, the frost unable to reach what had been buried beyond its grasp. She never charged the town for the water she provided during the freeze of 1887. She never accepted the position on the water board that Thatcher offered. She simply continued living on her homestead with running water that flowed year-round, the legacy of a husband who taught his wife everything he knew, and a wife who applied that knowledge when he was no longer there to do it himself. The original pipe system still exists beneath her homestead, replaced now with modern materials, but following the same trench that Margaret and Anna dug in the summer of 1885. The 7-foot depth has never failed. The frost has never reached it. The water has never stopped flowing, not through the worst winters Montana could produce, not through over a century of service. There is a small marker at the spring house now, installed by the Montana Historical Society in 1962. It reads simply, Vogel Water System, built 1885, buried 7 feet below frost line, the pipes that never burst. The settlers who had called her excessive, who had said that deeper digging was the fantasy of someone who calculated for disasters that never occurred, they understood what those words meant by the time the spring thaw came. The pipes that never burst. The depth that never froze. The calculations that a widow applied when everyone said a woman's opinion about engineering did not matter. If this story taught you something about building below the depth that winter can reach, subscribe to Wild West Retribution. We have more forgotten knowledge that saved lives when nothing else could. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been told your preparation was excessive until the disaster proved you right? 7 feet of depth, 6 feet of frost, 1 foot of margin. That is the engineering of survival when winter decides to test what you have built.